The scratchy wool of the old blanket bit into my palms as I sat on the edge of the cot. Outside, the bass from the sound system rattled the thin glass of the guest house window, a rhythmic, suffocating reminder of the party happening a mere 50 yards away. My sister Chloe's engagement party. The guest house was less of a house and more of a glorified storage shed, smelling of damp earth and cedar shavings. My mother had escorted me here herself just 3 hours ago, her fingers digging with surprising force into my forearm as she steered me down the gravel path, away from the main estate. "It's just for tonight, Leo," she had whispered, her eyes darting back toward the caterers setting up the ice sculptures on the lawn. "Julian's family is old money, traditional. They are very particular about optics. If they see you with your situation, it will complicate things. Chloe deserves this perfect night. Please, just stay here. We'll bring you a plate later." My situation was a neat little euphemism for a dishonorable discharge that wasn't actually dishonorable, and a shattered knee that ruined my military career before I could even reach 30. They saw me as a stain on the pristine fabric of the family legacy. My father was a judge, Chloe was a corporate lawyer, and Julian, the groom, was a high-flying tech venture capitalist from a political dynasty. And me. I was the broken soldier who worked as a night shift mechanic just to pay for physical therapy. I leaned back against the wall, watching the moths batter themselves against the single, unshaded light bulb dangling from the ceiling. Through the window, I could see the main house lit up like a cruise ship. Hundreds of people in black tie attire strolled through the manicured gardens. I could even see Chloe, looking like a literal princess in a champagne-colored gown, laughing as she held a glass of Dame Perignon. A sharp knock at the door broke my trance. I didn't answer, but the door pushed open anyway. It was my father, his tuxedo immaculate, his hair silvered perfectly at the temples. He didn't step all the way inside, as if afraid the failure radiating off me might stain his custom tailoring. He tossed a plastic container onto the small wooden table near the door. "Your mother sent this," he said, his voice flat, devoid of any warmth. "It's some of the appetizers. We need you to stay out of sight until at least midnight. Julian's father is arriving shortly, and the press might be taking photos near the driveway. We can't have you wandering around looking like you belong in a shelter." "I'm wearing a suit, Dad," I said quietly, pointing to the simple, off-the-rack black suit I had bought for the occasion. "I cleaned up." "It's not the clothes, Leo. It's the energy, the limp, the whole story," my father said, sighing as if he were the one suffering. "Just cooperate for once. Let your sister have her day. You've caused enough embarrassment." Before I could reply, he closed the door, the latch clicking into place with a definitive, crushing sound. I looked at the plastic container, 2 cold bacon-wrapped scallops and a crushed spring roll. I didn't touch them. Instead, I rubbed my throbbing knee, the phantom pains flaring up from the dampness of the room. I had spent 4 years in the infantry, survived a mortar blast in a valley halfway across the world, only to be locked in a shed by the people who shared my DNA because my limp didn't fit their aesthetic. Hours bled together. The music got louder, a mix of smooth jazz transitioning into high-end party tracks. I could hear the muffled sound of speeches through the microphone. My father's voice boomed over the speakers, talking about legacy, honor, and the beautiful union of 2 elite families. There was no mention of his eldest son. To the world outside this estate, I simply didn't exist. Around 10:00 p.m., the atmosphere outside shifted. The music suddenly stopped, replaced by a tense, expectant silence, followed by a flurry of activity near the main gates. Even from the guest house, I could hear the gravel crunching under heavy tires. A motorcade of 3 black, armored SUVs pulled up to the main entrance. The VIP had arrived. I knew from Chloe's endless bragging over the past month that Julian's family wasn't just wealthy. They were connected to the highest echelons of the global defense and tech sectors. The patriarch of the family, Julian's uncle, was a man named Arthur Vance. He was a reclusive billionaire, a former high-ranking government official who practically controlled the private military contracts for the entire Western Hemisphere. He rarely appeared at social events, and his arrival at this engagement party was considered the ultimate endorsement for my family's social climbing. Through the window, I watched the commotion. My parents and Chloe were practically vibrating with excitement, lining up at the grand entrance like servants awaiting a king. Julian stood at the front, adjusting his bow tie, his face pale with nerves. The door of the middle SUV opened. A tall, imposing man with stark white hair and a tailored charcoal suit stepped out. Even from this distance, his presence was commanding. Arthur Vance. My parents bowed slightly, hands extended, smiles so wide they looked painful. Arthur shook my father's hand briefly, gave Chloe a polite nod, and began walking toward the main pavilion. The crowd parted for him like the Red Sea. I watched for a few minutes more, then turned away, disgusted by the sycophancy. I lay down on the cart, closing my eyes, wishing I could just sleep through the rest of this miserable night. But peace didn't last. 20 minutes later, the door to the guest house flew open again. This time, it wasn't my father. It was Chloe, and her face was flushed with a mixture of panic and fury. "Leo, get up right now," she hissed, rushing into the small room and grabbing my arm. "What's wrong?" I asked, blinking against the sudden intrusion. "Did someone see me through the window? Did I ruin the optics?" "Shut up and listen to me," she snapped, her voice trembling. "Arthur Vance. He's looking for someone. He just stopped the entire dinner. He asked Julian's father where the commander was. They thought he was talking about Julian's dad, but Arthur got angry. He described a man with a scar on his jaw and a limp. Leo, he's talking about you." I froze, a scar on my jaw and a limp. "Why would Arthur Vance know who I am?" I asked, my heart skipping a beat. "I don't know, but he's furious," Chloe cried, tugging at my sleeve. "He found out from one of the security guards that someone matching that description was escorted to the guest house. He thinks we are disrespecting you. Dad is losing his mind. Julian is shaking. You need to come outside right now and fix this. Tell him it was your choice to stay here. Tell him you wanted privacy." I looked at my sister. Even now, in the middle of a panic, her main concern was covering up the family's lie. She didn't care why a billionaire was looking for her broken brother. She only cared about saving her engagement. I slowly stood up, my knee popping painfully. I brushed off my cheap suit jacket. "He wants to see me." "Yes, move faster, Leo. He's walking over here right now with the whole party following him." Before we could even step out the door, the sound of heavy footsteps on the gravel path grew loud. The shadows of a dozen people fell across the frosted glass of the guest house door. The door was pushed open from the outside. Arthur Vance stood in the doorway. Behind him, the courtyard was packed with wedding guests, all straining their necks to see what was happening. My mother and father were right behind Arthur, their faces completely drained of color, looking at me with a desperate, pleading intensity. My father kept making a subtle cutting motion across his throat, signaling me to keep my mouth shut. Arthur Vance ignored everyone. His sharp gray eyes scanned the cramped, dismal interior of the guest house, the stained walls, the exposed pipes, the cheap cart, and the untouched, cold appetizers in the plastic container. Then his eyes locked onto me. The stoic, unreadable expression on the billionaire's face cracked. His eyes widened, and for a fraction of a second, the powerful, untouchable Arthur Vance looked completely vulnerable. He took a slow step into the filthy room, his expensive leather shoes crunching on the dusty floorboards. The entire crowd outside held its breath. No one dared to make a sound. Arthur stopped exactly 2 feet in front of me. He looked at my cheap suit, then down at my right leg, which was trembling slightly from the strain of standing. "Sir," Arthur's voice broke the silence, deep and resonant, but carrying a tremor that shocked everyone who knew him. "Mr. Vance," I replied, keeping my voice steady, reverting back to the military discipline that had been drilled into me. Arthur didn't say another word. Instead, to the absolute horror and bewilderment of my parents, my sister, Julian, and every elite guest standing in the courtyard, the most powerful man in the room slowly sank toward the floor. He didn't just bow. Arthur Vance dropped to both knees on the dirty, unwashed floor of the guest house, right at my feet, and bowed his head. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd outside, sharp and uniform, like a sudden intake of air before a disaster. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, her manicured nails digging into her lips, while my father took a staggered step forward, his eyes bulging as if he were witnessing a hallucination. Julian stood frozen, his mouth slightly open, looking between his billionaire uncle and the outcast mechanic he had spent the last month marking behind closed doors. "Mr. Vance, please," I said, my voice cutting through the stunned silence. I reached down, grabbing him by the shoulders to pull him up. "Get up. You don't need to do this." Arthur Vance looked up, his grey eyes fiercely intense, glistening with a raw emotion that completely shattered his icy public persona. He didn't stand right away. He remained on his knees for a beat longer, his gaze fixed on my face. "If it weren't for you, Commander, I wouldn't have a family to celebrate tonight," Arthur said, his voice carrying clearly into the quiet courtyard. "My son would be in a casket, and I would be a broken man. I don't care whose house this is. I kneel before the man who gave me back my life." He finally allowed me to help him to his feet, brushing the dust from his pristine charcoal trousers with a careless flick of his wrist. He didn't look at my parents. He didn't look at Chloe or Julian. His entire focus remained locked on me. "I've been looking for you for 18 months, Leo," Arthur continued, using my actual name, a stark contrast to the cold title my father had dismissed me with hours earlier. "The Pentagon buried the reports. They told me the unit was classified, that the operative who pulled my boy out of the burning wreckage in the Korangal Valley had vanished from the grid. I didn't know you were here. I didn't know you were Asterisk, their Asterisk son." The puzzle pieces finally clicked into place for the onlookers, and the realization hit my family like a physical blow. 2 years ago, during my final deployment, my team had been tasked with a high-priority extraction. A civilian contractor's armored transport had been ambushed. The contractor turned out to be a young drone engineer, and as I was learning just now, Arthur Vance's only son. I had gone back into the burning vehicle under heavy fire to drag him out. The mortar blast that shattered my knee happened less than 10 seconds after I pulled him clear. To me, it was just the job. To Arthur Vance, it was everything. Julian stepped forward, his face pale, his voice cracking as he tried to navigate the sudden shift in reality. "Uncle Arthur. You know Leo. He's Chloe's brother. He's been living away. We didn't want to bother him with the noise of the party, so." Arthur spun around, his expression hardening into a mask of pure, terrifying authority. The warmth he had shown me vanished instantly as he faced his nephew. "You put him in a shed," Arthur said, his voice dropping to a dangerously low, calm register that made Julian visibly flinch. "You took a recipient of the Distinguished Service Cross, a man who spilled his blood so you could sit in your air-conditioned offices and trade stocks, and you locked him in a storage room with a plate of leftovers." "Arthur, please, it was a misunderstanding," my father interjected, his hands raised in a placating gesture, his legal brilliance failing him entirely in the face of genuine power. "Leo has been struggling since he got back. His mental state, his physical limitations. We thought it would be best for his own comfort to give him a quiet space away from the crowd. We were only thinking of him." It was a masterful lie, spun on the fly to paint their cruelty as compassion. I looked at my father, seeing the desperate pleading in his eyes. He wasn't begging for my forgiveness. He was begging for my silence. He needed me to play along to save his reputation. Arthur didn't buy it for a second. He walked over to the small wooden table, picked up the plastic container holding the cold, squashed appetizers, and held it up for the entire crowd to see. "A quiet space?" Arthur asked, a toxic edge to his voice. "Is this how a federal judge treats a hero? Is this the comfort you provide your eldest son? I have spent the last half hour listening to you speak on the microphone about legacy and honor, Richard, but I see no honor here. I see a room full of cowards hiding the most honorable man among you. The crowd of elite guests was utterly silent, captivated by the brutal dismantling of my family's pristine image. People who had been laughing and drinking with my parents minutes ago were now whispering fiercely, their eyes darting to the cheap guest house. The social capital my father had spent decades building was evaporating in a matter of seconds. Chloe stepped forward, tears welling in her eyes, looking at Julian for support, but Julian was too terrified of his uncle to look back at her. "Julian, say something," she whispered. "Leo, tell Uncle Arthur that you're fine." I looked at Chloe. I looked at the beautiful gown, the expensive diamond ring on her finger, and then I looked down at my own worn shoes. For years, I had accepted their treatment. I had accepted the narrative that I was the disappointment, the broken piece that didn't fit. I had stayed in this room tonight because I still, on some pathetic level, wanted them to love me. But looking at them now, shivering under the glare of Arthur Vance's fury, I realized they didn't deserve my protection. "They told me to stay here because of the optics, Mr. Vance," I said clearly, my voice echoing across the courtyard. "My mother told me my limp would complicate things with your family. My father told me I looked like I belonged in a shelter and that I shouldn't cause any more embarrassment." A collective murmur of disgust swept through the wedding guests. My mother let out a soft, strangled cry and looked down at the gravel. My father's jaw clenched, his face turning a deep, dangerous shade of purple, but he couldn't speak. You don't call a billionaire a liar when he holds your entire professional and social future in his hands. Arthur nodded slowly, his eyes burning with a quiet, dangerous resolve. He turned his back on my family entirely, facing me once more. "Then this party is over," Arthur announced. "Uncle, wait," Julian pleaded, taking a step forward. "The investors are here. The governor is on his way. We can't just end it now." "I said it is over," Arthur repeated, his voice booming with absolute finality. He looked at his security detail, who had moved up to flank the guest house door. "Clear my vehicles. We are leaving." He then extended his hand to me. "Leo, my car is outside. My son is in San Francisco right now, running our primary R&D facility. He asks about you every single week. He has spent millions trying to track down the man who pulled him from that Humvee. You are coming with me. You will never spend another night in a room like this as long as I am breathing." I looked at his outstretched hand. I felt the weight of my family's eyes on me, my father's furious glare, my mother's silent tears, Chloe's panicked, desperate, silent begging. If I walked out that door with Arthur Vance, the engagement was as good as dead. The Vance family would withdraw their social and financial backing, and my family, standing in the city's elite circles, would be permanently ruined. I smiled, a genuine, free smile for the first time in years. "I just need to grab my coat," I said. I reached onto the cart, picked up my old military field jacket, the one my father had told me to hide under the bed so nobody would see it, and slipped it on over my suit. I walked past my father, who stood frozen like a statue, and my sister, who looked at me as if I were a stranger executioner breaking her world apart. As I stepped out of the guest house, Arthur Vance walked beside me, matching his stride to my slow, limping pace. He didn't rush me. He didn't try to make me look normal. He walked with me proudly, shoulder to shoulder, past the sea of staring billionaires, politicians, and socialites. Just as we reached the driveway where the armored SUVs stood waiting, a loud voice called out from the back of the crowd. It was my father, breaking through his shark, rushing toward the edge of the lawn. "Leo, wait," he shouted, his voice cracking with a mixture of anger and desperation. "You can't just walk away from this family, after everything we've given you. You think this man cares about you. You're a liability. If you leave this estate tonight, don't you dare think about coming back." Arthur stopped, his hand on the door handle of the lead SUV. He turned his head slightly, looking back at my father with an expression of profound pity. "He won't need to come back, Richard," Arthur said smoothly, "because by tomorrow morning I am buying the debt on your estate, your law firm's primary commercial lease, and the funding for your upcoming judicial campaign. You wanted to talk about optics. Let's see how your optics look when you're looking for a new place to live." Arthur opened the door for me, and I climbed into the plush, leather interior of the luxury vehicle. As the heavy, soundproof door clicked shut, isolating me from the chaos outside, I looked through the tinted glass. My father was standing on the gravel, completely paralyzed, realizing that in his attempt to hide his broken son, he had just dismantled his own empire. Chloe was on her knees on the lawn, sobbing into her champagne gown, while Julian stared at the ground, unable to even look at her. The engine roared to life, a deep, powerful purr, and the motorcade began to move, leaving the flashing lights and the ruined party behind in the dust. The silence inside the armored SUV was heavy, but it wasn't the suffocating, hostile silence of the guest house. It was the quiet of a bunker after the shelling stops, safe, solid, and absolute. The hum of the tires against the asphalt was the only sound as the estate vanished into the darkness behind us. Arthur Vance sat across from me in the spacious cabin, his posture relaxed, but his eyes still carrying that intense, watchful energy. He poured 2 glasses of water from a small crystal decanter built into the console and handed one to me. "To new beginnings, Commander," Arthur said, clinking his glass gently against mine. "Just Leo, please," I said, taking a sip. The cold water cleared the taste of the stale air from my throat. "And thank you. You didn't have to go that far with my father." Arthur let out a soft, humorless laugh. "A man who locks his own son in a shed to impress outsiders doesn't understand gentleness, Leo. He understands leverage. And right now I have all of it. But let's not waste any more breath on them. They are the past. Let's talk about your future." He pressed a button on the armrest, and a partition slid down, revealing a large digital screen displaying a medical facility layout and various engineering schematics. "My son, Ethan, didn't just walk away from that ambush with his life. He walked away with a mission," Arthur explained, pointing to the screen. "He knew that the armor on that transport failed. He knew that the only reason he survived was because a human being put his own body between him and a blast. Since he got back to the States, he's been pouring our capital into advanced prosthetics, exoskeleton development, and tactical medical tech. He wanted to build things that ensure no soldier has to rely on pure luck to survive." Arthur looked directly at my shattered knee. "And he wanted to build something for you. We tracked your medical records up until your discharge, but then you went off the grid. The military doctors told you that the nerve damage was irreversible, didn't they?" "They said I was lucky to keep the leg," I replied, my hand instinctively resting on my knee. "They offered me a desk job or a pension. I took the pension and left. I didn't want to be a reminder of a bad day in the valley." "Well, the military doctors didn't have a $10 billion R&D budget," Arthur said with a sharp smile. "We fly to San Francisco tonight. Tomorrow morning you meet Ethan. We have a team of the best orthopedic surgeons and bioengineers in the world waiting at our private facility. If you're willing, we start your rehabilitation immediately. No expense spared." I stared at the schematics on the screen. For 2 years, I had accepted the limp, the constant ache, and the pitying or disgusted looks from my family. I had resigned myself to a life lived in the shadows, fixing other people's cars while my own body rusted away. The idea that there was a way out, that my sacrifice hadn't just ended my life, but had started a new one, felt overwhelming. "Why me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "You could have just sent a check." "A check pays a debt, Leo. It doesn't honor a brother," Arthur said softly. "Ethan doesn't view you as a contractor or a soldier. He views you as the man who gave him his tomorrow. And as for me, you gave me back my son. There isn't a check big enough in the world to cover that." The drive to the private airfield was short. Within an hour, we were boarding a sleek matte black private jet. As the plane lifted off into the night sky, leaving the city and my family, far below, a profound sense of relief washed over me. For the first time since the blast, the phantom pains in my leg felt manageable. I fell asleep to the steady drone of the jet engines. The next morning, the sun was shining brightly over the Pacific Ocean as we pulled up to the Vance Tech Research Campus in South San Francisco. The facility was a sprawling complex of glass and steel overlooking the bay. Arthur led me through the high-security entrance, passing rows of biometric scanners and armed guards who saluted him sharply. We took a private elevator down to the subterranean laboratory levels. When the doors opened, a young man in a lab coat, walking with a slight but steady stride, was waiting for us. He had a faint scar running down the side of his neck, a matching souvenir from the Coringal Valley. Ethan Vance. The moment his eyes met mine, he froze. The tablet he was holding slipped from his fingers, clattering loudly against the polished concrete floor. He didn't care. He took 3 long strides forward and threw his arms around me in a crushing embrace. "I knew you were alive," Ethan whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I knew it. They told me you disappeared, but I told Dad I wouldn't stop looking." He pulled back, his hands resting on my shoulders, his eyes taking in my cheap suit and the military jacket I still wore. "Look at you. You're still wearing the jacket." "It's the only thing that still fits right," I said, a lump forming in my throat. Ethan wiped his eyes and laughed, a bright, resilient sound. "Well, we're going to get you some new clothes, and we're going to get that leg fixed. Come look at this." He dragged me over to a massive glass-enclosed testing bay. Inside, a robotic framework was undergoing stress tests, mimicking the precise movements of a human leg. "This is the Vanguard Initiative," Ethan said proudly, pointing to the machine. "It's a microhydraulic neural implant. It doesn't replace the limb, it bridges the damaged nerves. It learns your gait, anticipates your movement, and absorbs 90% of the impact. I built it for you, Leo. We just need to calibrate it to your specific nerve topography." For the next 3 days, I lived in a world of advanced science and genuine care. There were no judgments, no snide remarks about my appearance, and no talk of optics. I was poked, prodded, and scanned by the world's leading medical minds, but through it all, Ethan was by my side, explaining every procedure, treating me like a brother. On the 4th day, the surgery was performed. When I woke up in the recovery room, Ethan and Arthur were standing at the foot of my bed. "How does it feel?" Ethan asked, leaning forward anxiously. I slowly moved my right leg. For the first time in 2 years, the dull, agonizing ache that had occupied the back of my mind was gone. In its place was a strange, cool sensation of absolute stability. I pushed the sheets back and swung my legs over the side of the bed. "Leo, take it easy," Arthur warned, stepping forward to help. "No," I said, my voice firm. "Let me try." I placed both feet flat on the floor. I stood up. There was no tremor. There was no sharp spike of agony radiating up my hip. I took a step forward, then another. My stride was perfectly fluid, perfectly balanced. The limp that had defined my existence, the flaw that had made my family ashamed to look at me, was completely gone. I looked at Ethan and then at Arthur. "It works. It actually works." Ethan let out a triumphant shout, slamming his fist against the wall, while Arthur smiled warmly, a tear finally escaping the old man's stoic eyes. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in Arthur's top-floor office, looking out over the San Francisco skyline. I was wearing a charcoal suit tailored perfectly to my new, upright frame. I looked like a completely different man. Arthur's assistant tapped on the door and stepped in, holding a sleek tablet. "Mr. Vance, the legal team from the acquisition is on line 1. They have finalized the paperwork for the properties in Seattle." Arthur nodded. "Put them through." He looked at me, a dangerous glint in his eye. "Would you like to take this call, Leo? It concerns your former family." I picked up the desk phone. and pressed the blinking line. "Leo," a voice cracked through the speaker. It was my father, but the booming, arrogant voice of Judge Richard Vance was entirely gone. He sounded small, defeated, and terrified. "Leo, is that you? Please tell me you're there." "I'm here, Richard," I said, deliberately using his first name. A heavy gasp came from the other end. "Leo, thank God. You have to talk to Mr. Vance, the bank. They came today. They foreclosed on the estate. They gave us 48 hours to pack our things, and Chloe's engagement. Julian's father pulled all the funding for the law firm. We are facing bankruptcy, Leo. Your mother is hysterical. Chloe won't leave her room. We didn't know. We didn't know who he was to you. We were just trying to protect the family name." "You were trying to protect a lie," I said, my voice cold and steady. "You locked your son in a shed because you were ashamed of the wounds he got protecting this country. You cared more about what billionaires thought of your lifestyle than whether your own blood had a warm meal." "Leo, please, we are your family," my father begged, his voice breaking into a sob. "We raised you. You can't let them destroy us like this. Tell Arthur to call off the wolves. We'll make it up to you. You can have the main suite in the house. We'll hold a press conference. We'll tell everyone what a hero you are." I looked down at my leg, strong, functional, and whole. I looked at Arthur and Ethan, who were watching me with quiet respect. I had found a real family, one built on honor, sacrifice, and genuine love, not on corporate optics and social standing. "The guest house is still standing, right?" I asked quietly. "What? Yes, yes, of course it is," my father said quickly, a desperate spark of hope in his voice. "Good," I said, a cold smile crossing my face. "Because 48 hours is plenty of time for you to pack your bags and move into it. Let's see how your optics look from the shed." Before he could respond, I pressed the button, cutting the line and silencing his desperate pleading forever. I handed the phone back to Arthur, stood up, and adjusted my jacket. My stride was perfect as I walked toward the door, ready to face the world on my own terms. The broken soldier was gone. The commander was back.